Alright, so I just hosed this hood down with Ospho pretty heavy. Show you some of the heavy spots here. This white residue. Black parts are treated rust, the white parts are residue. So before it dries, come through and try to wipe up a whole bunch of that. Any runs I see, stuff like that. The other option is come back tomorrow and hit it with a slightly damp cloth, which is probably where I'll leave most of it. I just want to get any of the runs that I'm seeing right now. Those will pile up and give me problems at the primer level. Oh, and also that stuff gets sticky when it starts to dry. It'll start tearing off your paper towel, leaving fibers too. So, guess I'm about done wiping it off. He says still wiping. Okay, here's a little bit there. The powdery residue. Now it's paper towel. Oh well. Come back tomorrow, hit that with a damp cloth, that'll all come off. And you can see on the back top side, that's pretty heavy too. I got a lot of prep to do after this round of Ospho. So this is the residue that everybody's talking about. Black part right here, that's still drying, that's pretty good. All this stuff here is heavy residue though. You see it's just, I put it on too thick. It's really windy out here, so I was trying to make sure I hit it. You see the paper towels coming off on it. It's already starting to dry a little bit too much for this method. Have to come back tomorrow and wipe it with a wet cloth. Maybe even run over it with some 180. Bottom side, I'm most likely just going to wipe off with a damp cloth. Let that dry and then shoot it with epoxy. Then do a wet on wet with the paint. After I wipe all this down with a damp cloth, let it dry, then it'll be fine. Here's some of the treated rust stuff. Even after sandblasting, there's some in the little pits there. That's what the Ospho's for. This is the bottom side of a hood that I sprayed with Ospho yesterday. First we sandblasted the hood, blew it all off, wiped off the dust as best we could, and sprayed it down with Ospho. I put it through a regular gravity feed paint gun, just dialed back the flow real good, and I hosed it down pretty good, as you can see. Now, a lot of people ask what to do when the Ospho's looking like this, or what to do after you put it on. So after you apply the Ospho, you want to wait until it's dry, typically overnight is what the directions recommend. 24, 48 hours, somewhere around there, depending on your climate. And you may come up with stuff like this. What the directions recommend is you take a damp cloth. Now this is just barely wet. It's wrung out as tight as I can get it. Get it wet, wring it out as tight as you can get it. No drips. And you just want to basically scrub off all the excess. You don't have to push terribly hard, but a little bit of pressure helps some of the deeper spots. And if you're wiping it down and it gets to the point where it doesn't feel like the cloth is being very effective, kind of like old worn out sandpaper, if you start to have to rub a whole lot more than you were to start with, re-wet the cloth and just wring it out about as tight as you can get it. I'm not saying gorilla grip the thing every time, but till it stops running. Till it stops dripping, about there. A couple of drops on here isn't too bad, but that's about how wet you want it. You just don't want to get the metal too wet or have any water dripping. That'll get off the excess without too much moisture being added to the metal. It'll evaporate fairly quick, especially in the sun. And that's about it, I think. Mostly want to get rid of any crusty residue, any of the white powdery stuff, or any of those black trails that were at the edge of the drips, as you saw earlier. Typically I don't have to go back and wipe it down very much, but I was spraying Ospho yesterday and it was really windy, probably about a 17-mile-an-hour wind. And I didn't want to miss any spots. I knew I'd have to come back and wipe it down, but I didn't want to have to wait another overnight or 24 hours. As you can see, it's taken off all the texture here, any of that ridge stuff that's left from the residue. You don't want that. So that wipes off like that. You can still see some staining from it, but it's flat. That's just different levels of etching from the acid. It of course etched a little more in spots where it's deeper. Stayed wetter longer, so you get some stains, but that's nothing to worry about. Well, there's a section to show you. Still drying a little bit. And after this, I'll wipe it off with a tack cloth and spray it down with some epoxy.